Hi everybody, let's learn to play some choro. I have a few rhythmic patterns and some ideas for how to interpret and how to phrase choros that I'm going to be giving to you today. If you want to check about the history of choro, I strongly recommend you to do so. Check my previous video about the brief history of choro. And if you want to know more about Brazilian music in general, check out my channel. There are many other interesting lectures there. And let's jump right into it. So I think the most important thing for us to understand regarding accompaniment, especially if you're a piano player, guitar player, mandolin player, cavaquinho player, any sort of like accompaniment chord instrument, we need to learn the most basic and standard form of accompaniment, which is going to be tum cha cha tum cha cha tum cha 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 cha. That's kind of like the heartbeat of a lot of Brazilian music. We should all be very comfortable doing that on our instrument. And it's like a 16 note, 8 note, 16 note. And this is how it would sound kind of on as a regular accompaniment. So as you can see, you can kind of understand kind of the point. If I were to play guitar, I would do like sometimes the middle note, the eighth note in the middle, is a little bit shorter. That gives a little more of a swing, like a cool vibe. Instead of holding too much the middle note, I played a little shorter. And you can do that with one hand if you're a piano player. So that's kind of like the basic accompaniment figure. Now, there are two other things that you should know that are possible. There are two types of tambourine, the Brazilian tambourine pattern, not pandeiro, tambourine. Two patterns that are very important. The first one I consider to be kind of like the basic tambourine pattern that you're gonna see a lot, especially in old choros from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and also slow choros in general. Even slow samba, sometimes you can use the same pattern. And it goes like this. Pa, 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 da, pa, 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 da. If you want to do a great exercise, you can kind of fill up on the spaces in between the hits with 16 notes, like pa pu pa pu pa pu pu pa pu pa pu pa pu pa pa pu pa, like. And then you can add the first pattern on your left hand if you're a pianist. If you play piano, you can always hold that easy pattern on the left hand while you play a melody as well, you know? So I played a little bit of counterpoint. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The second pattern that is also tambourine pattern that is really useful is kind of the opposite of the first one, the reverse of the first one. Many people say that Brazilian music does not have a clave, comparing it to Afro-Cuban music. I think the opposite. I think Brazilian has very strong clave. The only difference is that the clave is more flexible, so it's not there are not so many rules for that clave. That clave can change as it goes, or it's not fixed. It can have some special accents, but it's heavily clave based, So I think the methodology with which educators in Brazil teach choro never talks about claves like that. I think they should. I think it's absolutely essential. And so the second one is the reversal. So It starts like this: 3, 4. That 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Same thing. This type of clave is used normally in very fast choros, more of the modern choros, or in samba. You can also use that in samba. You hear this a lot in samba schools, in the parades, carnival. You hear this type of pattern. So you hear that all the time, like. So you see that in like fast sambas and more of the modern choro, a lot of Jacó do Bandolim choro. You hear like in a piece like Assanhado. Anyways, you have a lot of that pattern being used. So these are kind of my rhythmic suggestions. Now let's move to the interpretation part of it, so the melodic aspect of it. So whenever we talk about choro and how to interpret choro, we need to make clear that we can remember that dichotomy or that dialectic, that conversation between the African element and the European element. The African element meaning that drive, that rhythmic drive, rhythmic inventive kind of like pulse, and the accents, the syncopations, the fun, the rhythmic fun. And as the European part of it, I would say the melodic use, the flamboyant melodies, the use of appoggiaturas, the lyrical aspect of it. So I almost imagine that I'm singing opera when I want to refer to that European part, and when I want to refer to the more of the African root of it, I try to be way more rhythmic. So we need, as musicians, regardless of your instrument, to make sure that we can understand this dialectics, and that we can learn how to negotiate, how to balance rhythmic rigor with a certain melodic flexibility. By that I mean, one way of practicing that is by learning how to play rubato. So rubato means with no real time. Rubato means to steal time from Italian. So you're basically stealing time by slowing down melody and speeding it up, trying not to necessarily fit the grid, but at the same time, you are keeping an awareness, a very strong awareness of where that pulse is, or of where the rhythm is. So one example that I always use to describe this music is a little piece by Jacó do Bandolim called Vibrações. It's one of the most beautiful, like, slow choros, and it's excellent for us to see as an example. So check this out. So here we go. This is Vibrações by Jacó do Bandolim, and if I were to read the score exactly the way that is written, this is how it would sound. So you will absolutely never hear this melody being played this way. Okay, this is a melody that requires you to use some of that European flamboyant rubato type of interpretation. That's how you normally hear this melody. So you hear how I'm being completely free with that melody. That's part of the style. So I recommend, if you want to play this, exaggerate on your interpretation. It's perfectly fine to exaggerate. It's even necessary, you know? Don't be shy to really let your lyricism kind of take over. And that's why it sounds so beautiful, this type of approach, because it feels like you're interpreting that melody and it's taking over your heart so much that you don't even respect the rhythm anymore. However, if you are to play with a lot of this kind of rubato approach, you need to make sure that you show to your audience that you are in control over the rhythm. Because if you just play rubato the whole time, it's just going to sound like you're lost. It's not going to sound like you are being flexible. So I would recommend that you kind of explore going away from the beat, from meter, and then returning to it, normally at the end of phrases. It's okay to be flexible in the beginning, but as you approach the end of 4 bars or the end of 8 bars or a period or a sentence, it's good to try to make your rhythm very strict and very tight, as if you're showing the band and also the audience like, yeah, I'm being flexible here and there, but I know when to return to the beat. I know when to be very strict and connect to the grid, to that subdivision. So let me show you an example here. I'm going to play kind of the beginning here, very rubato, very freely. But when I get here to this point, that's kind of the end of this first phrase. I'm gonna make sure that those 4 notes right here, that I'm being very accurate rhythmically with them. Okay, check it out. Again. So always the last notes, I was playing them extremely on the right place in order to kind of lock the rhythm again. And while I'm being all flexible with my melody, notice that my left hand is being absolutely stable. I'm not changing anything. I'm not being rubato with my left hand. My left hand is keeping the time as an inner metronome. So my right hand can be very loose, But my left hand is keeping time very properly. That's one of the secrets. If you play a melodic instrument, if you play flute, clarinet, saxophone, you can do the same exercise, but instead of playing that left hand, try to keep the pattern on, like by tapping your feet or by doing some sort of rhythmic patterns with your legs or something that will force you to connect to the ground, and at the same time a melody that can connect you to the space. So that's the dialectics that I'm talking about. So this is like a key element. And second element, instead of thinking about improvisation, think about variation, think about ornamentation. There's not a tradition of taking solos on choro. This is an American invention. We are borrowing from the jazz world. The purpose here is to actually use the melodic material that you already have and just make it a little more flamboyant, or at least like changing a little bit of the rhythm, adding a few passing or neighbor notes, So I think we need to start shifting, think more about the Dixieland time, the early jazz groups, for example, where not necessarily they're taking solos, they're just playing the melody with a lot of variations. So this is gonna make it more authentic. That's where the authentic sound comes from. So instead of just starting a new solo from a scratch, try to do something that's more connected to the melody itself. So I'm even quoting part of the melodies here. It's way more of this authentic style that I'm talking about. Another thing, whenever you're trying to improvise or create variations, instead of going with too much scales, think more about arpeggios. Okay, think about arpeggios. That's also early jazz worked the same way. A lot of arpeggios and blues scale in that case. But here, arpeggios. Go up and down arpeggios, and you can always add a fourth note. Normally, jazz players are super afraid to play a triad. A pianist, jazz hands want to play like 7/9, 11th, 13th, and all the upper structures. So this Choro forces you to kind of be a little more conservative in the sense, but explore creativity within that constraint, that harmonic constraint. And by using arpeggios, you kind of manage to create a little bit of different melodic shapes. And I would say if you have minor chords, you can add major six, like instead of seven. The seven is already too jazzy for an authentic Choro style. The same way, sometimes you have a dominant chord, you can use even a major nine. That's how far I would go. Or a flat nine, depending if you're going to a major chord or to a minor chord. And so, here I'm gonna just play with my right hand, a little solo, or a little improvisation, let's say, over vibrações, but addressing arpeggios. 1, 2, 3. So, of course, I'm not playing strictly arpeggios. I'm connecting arpeggios by using little appoggiaturas, little ornaments. So, if I'm going here, I can start maybe by a little appoggiatura. You see, like a little using neighbor notes. So a little chromatic passage to connect notes, So it's this mix of like little chromatic things, approach here and there, with a lot of arpeggios. And then you can try to do that in a little more rubato way, I'm not following necessarily this harmony, but you can get the idea, all right? So this will lead, doing this type of exercise with arpeggios will lead your melodies to be more self-sufficient. And this is something that you should always strive when you play Choro. The idea that you don't need to, you already hear the chords on your melody. If you're using arpeggios, that's fairly natural. But in general, you're going to have a way more powerful interpretation or variation or improvisation, however you want to call it, if you manage to kind of express the whole harmonic content on your melody by itself. So it's always good to play the traditional famous choros because they are very self-sufficient. If you just play the melody on a flute, it already tells you all the harmony. You don't even need to have an accompaniment out. It makes so much sense. And so one other aspect is the idea of counterpoint. Similar to the obligato line that you see a lot in Dixieland music and early jazz, Choro also has that. As part of like kind of the improvisatory nature of it, you have people playing counter lines or something to support the melody. And normally these melodies, these other lines, they require some harmonic knowledge in order to know how to weave that, that melody together with the main melody. And my recommendation is to start checking out Pixinguinha's counterpoints when he plays with the flute player Benedito Lacerda. They recorded many albums together, Pixinguinha and Benedito Lacerda, and you can find some scores where you see a transcription of the counterpoints that Pixinguinha was playing on the tenor saxophone. And by the way, Pixinguinha and Benedito have a very interesting relationship. Pixinguinha was going through hard financial times, and Benedito decided to offer to giving some money in exchange to have his name as co-author of all of Pixinguinha's music. So it's kind of a challenging situation right there. But in any case, you start to notice that Pixinguinha had brilliant ideas for counterpoint. Very simple, but very tasteful. So he would always be aware of what note the melody was playing and trying to play another note that fit the chord. So if you're in D minor, and you would have the melody be an F, Pixinguinha would somehow try to play a D or an A in his solo. As you can also check out a lot of 7-string guitar accompaniment. 7-string guitar is a common accompanist in a Choro group nowadays, and they have like all these like really complex lines that they play with the low string, and a lot of these lines also came from the way Pixinguinha was accompanying. You know, this it's pure counterpoint. The first exercise to develop that's the one I want to give to you right now, is always playing 3 16 notes leading to the downbeat of the next chord. So it's much easier if I talk, if I play for you. So check this out. Imagine that I'm gonna play this sequence of chords right here. I'm just gonna address the first chord of each bar because this is slow Choro. So I'm gonna play always 3 16 notes leading to the downbeat of the next one. Like, check out my left hand. So I'm all the time using the same rhythm. Then you can connect kind of those little motives. So this is how you start to develop a little bit of that contrapuntal vibe. If you play any sort of melodic instrument, you can do that while you listen to the melody. If you play an accompaniment instrument, even more, you can kind of sing the melody and try at the same time to improvise those counterpoints. So, so this is a great, exercise I recommend checking out and learning as many tunes as you can. As many pieces. You're not going to learn Choro by learning 1 or 2. You need to learn 10. You need to learn 15. So I have a list of my favorite. This is my list of my 20 favorite Choros, and I mean the list could be much bigger. These are my personal favorite, and I consider them to be the essential ones. You're going to hear them a lot if you go to any session. And I recommend to try to memorize. The more you memorize, the easier it's going to become to memorize others, because you kind of start understanding the language, and then it becomes like easy. You become fluent at Choro language. And I recommend you to find friends and try to perform this music. It's not hard. It's so great. You can play with any sort of instrumentation and orchestration with, it doesn't really matter. The music, it's so good by itself that any instrument can basically make a good sound playing this. And so those are kind of my basic tips. I hope you use that, and if you have questions, feel free to ask me or reach out, write down here. And that's it. See you next time. Bye bye.